Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Tuesday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. The Lakers have their first practice in the books, and what stands out? Max Christie and attention to detail. That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day, Monday through Friday. No matter how or where you get your podcasts, this one's always going to be free, never behind a paywall. And Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where over 25,000 subscribers are feeling the excitement, Andy, of a new season. There are practices. There are things happening. There is a game Friday between the Lakers and the Timberwolves of Minnesota. One of the first of 6 preseason games for the Lakers, which normally feels like way too many, but actually this year feels like maybe a couple too few. So we will get into all of those things. We'll talk about what happened on the first full day of practice for the Lakers, what stood out. Do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you get started with $200, 5 to 200. Yeah, in bonus bets, guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. There were, I think, a couple recurring themes when you go and you look at the practice reports and all that stuff from Monday, Andy, the first full day that the Lakers are on the floor together. The first might have been probably was Max Christie, so we'll get to him in a second. But once again, Andy, this idea of organization, of attention to detail, of all this, LeBron talked about it, other players talked about it. The Lakers are very much, it seems, focused on this in terms of something that's different between last year and this year.
There was a really specific thing that JJ Redick did heading into this practice that reminded me a little bit, if you've ever worked in a restaurant before, worked in a kitchen, the idea of doing your prep work. So once you are actually on the clock when it comes to creating the food, you've got everything laid out in front of you. It turned out that Monday night after media day, JJ Redick had the entire team meet somewhere in Beverly Hills, and they talked through the identity on both sides of the ball and what Jovan Buha relaying JJ Redick's thoughts, and also from LeBron James, Max Christie, the idea of like ground rules for the season. And the reason being, beyond just, again, that attention to detail, JJ Redick not wanting to essentially waste time during the first practice explaining everything that he could do the night before. JJ Redick said, quote, "I would say our preparation bore fruit. It was a very productive day. I thought our guys came in with a very high level of focus and intent, and all the things that we talked about over the last 6 to 8 weeks and all the things we talked about yesterday were reflected in the way we played basketball today. The reason I did one of those things is I'm big on using time efficiently. I haven't been around LeBron a ton, but I know that's big for him as well. And I think as any NBA player will tell you, they really value their time. And I did not want to take time today to have a very long meeting. So I used that last night as a meeting just to set the tone for who we're going to be on both ends of the floor and the things we're going to value as a group. And that's really what last night was about. Again, just the idea of making the most of every day in front of you, every opportunity in front of you, just to keep learning, to keep fine-tuning everything. That is a recurrent theme so far in the JJ Redick era.
Yeah, as short as it may be. And I think, look, I mean, the comparison about time is an easy one. Like you go back, and if there was a complaint, and there were a few, about Mike Brown, for example, in his first run, as a head coach with the Lakers,
which we covered.
It was that his stuff took too long. And we know this because we were the ones in the media room waiting for practice to be over at 1. Media availability will start at 1:15, whatever. And 3:00 rolls around. We're still in the media room waiting for things, which means they're still on the court. And, it is, especially as, the season goes on and you get less time and guys are tired and they need their therapy but you still need to get better as a team. Redick is exactly right. Using your players' time wisely, using any employee's time wisely. We all know how annoying it is to have to get on like a Zoom call at work or do something that could have absolutely 100% been accomplished by an email or a text or a Slack message or something like that. And so if you're Redick and you are trying to build, all this stuff about culture and this and that, whatever, honestly is secondary to the fact that in the back of everybody's mind, there is still this notion of like, this guy has never done this before. And so if he looks like someone who is struggling with the details or missing a few things, even if you're like, oh, you know what, he'll figure it out, whatever, it feeds this notion of a first-time coach, not first-time head coach, and allows a certain amount of doubt to enter the minds of a team that cannot afford to have doubt in this particular space. And so it's not just respectful, it's not just a smart way to use time or whatever. It's critical for these first few days of Redick's training camp to be one where the clock is appropriate and we go from the drills have purpose, and we say we're going to be done with this drill at this time and we're done. We're saying we're going to be done at practice and we're done. And like all of this stuff is really important for him to establish credibility as a coach.
Yeah, absolutely. And you brought up the Mike Brown era for the Lakers, and look, Mike Brown has turned into a terrific head coach, and he has admittedly learned from mistakes. He, by his own admission, was not in the right place when he got hired for the Lakers to coach that team of Kobe and Powell and Artest and the Andrew Bynum, like these veterans who had, frankly, accomplished more in the NBA than him. And I remember when Mike Brown got hired, it was during the lockout offseason, so the team had no access to the players. And I remember the only guy that really mattered that the team had access to was Mike Brown. And the Lakers had this lunch for local media, and I know I was there. I believe you were there as well, with Mike Brown. And he's introducing himself to all of us and talking about, his philosophies and the way he approaches stuff. And I remember he took out these like thick 3-ring binders showing us, and one of them was labeled offense. The other was labeled defense, and the third was labeled practice. And I remember at that moment thinking, this is not going to work. In that experience with Mike Brown, I actually took for myself, like, there is such a thing as being over-prepared and not streamlining the details. Like, you can actually be too meticulous for your own good if you don't actually have any ability to prioritize stuff and to get a beat on the pulse of your team.
There are certain things these guys don't need, like, and they don't need your voice. Like with this group, and we can talk a little bit about this after the break, like, because there's another aspect of this that I'm really curious, to your point about how Redick is going to handle these things. But, with this group, like LeBron made this, like, we have an offense to learn, as he called it a collision course. He meant crash course. Like, they got work to do. Like, they need to learn an offensive system. They need to learn a defensive system. And, if they're going to take advantage of the continuity that they have as players in terms of knowing each other's preferences and things like that, they have to learn this stuff quickly, because otherwise some of those advantages are going to be mitigated by the fact that they're all kind of wandering through an offense or a defensive structure that they don't know particularly well. So, let's next talk a little bit about that. And then the one question that I really have for Redick as the season goes along, and Andy, JJ Redick said he's planning on playing a 9-man rotation, which means some big names on the Lakers roster are going to be sitting on the bench. We'll get to it next.
Locked On Lakers is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can enjoy the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Let's just say you're watching a game and you're feeling a hunch, and you know exactly how you want to lay down a bet. Well, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and have all sorts of information on the same page as you're entering that bet. So just like we're talking about with JJ Redick, the importance of streamlining information, efficiency, and You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet, and NBA season inching closer to kicking off. Exciting. Our friends at FanDuel have options for you. As of this recording, the Lakers 35-1 to win the title. Anthony Davis 150 to 1 for MVP. LeBron 200 to 1. Dalton Connect 10 to 1 for Rookie of the Year. Max Christie 150 to 1 for Most Improved Player. That is FanDuel.com.
Quick reminder, make another Locked On podcast your second listen of the day as training camps have opened and everybody is getting in the swing of things. Locked On NBA is a great option for that. You can see people like Andy and me periodically, these local experts, and get a feel for what's going on around the league as we get ready for the season. So this question of editing is one that I think that I am fascinated by with Redick, is this idea of simultaneously harping on how obsessive you are with details, how much all this stuff is important to you, and figuring it out. And, we got everything so granular. We get there is no question that we will not have an answer to, and if we don't, we'll find it out for you. How both that, we talked over the summer about that question of unplugging. When do you create a little bit of space so that when times are bad, like, you don't overdo it, you don't overthink. But the other part about this is, how do you make sure that the players, you can distill, if you're back here with all the details, how can you distill the important stuff down for the players and edit a practice down to, to the elements that need to be conveyed? And as a first-time coach, how do you differentiate between those details that you can omit from a practice plan versus those that need to be there? The stuff you do need to cover in a limited film session versus the stuff that you maybe let go or something. This is where I think it's more than offensive schemes, defensive schemes, whatever, the value of having a couple of really veteran head coaches on your staff will help him. It's not so much what play are we going to run, it's which of these things would you do during practice or whatever it might be, however he frames those questions.
I could be totally wrong about this, and I know that the consensus in terms of the coaches that the Lakers hired for JJ Redick's staff, I've seen pretty mixed in terms of the feedback on them. I know that one of the things, though, and I say this as somebody who is not deeply entrenched in terms of the coaching scene around the league.
But a lot of most of that feedback that you're talking about, at least as I've seen it, is I didn't like Scott Brooks's offense, or Nate McMillan's defense wasn't right, or whatever it is. It's that kind of reaction.
Right. And I would say, too, like, especially as over the last 4 or 5 years, the way NBA, certainly the Lakers, but I think across the league, access has become more limited to players, to staffs, all sorts of things. It has been harder, at least for me, to meet some of these guys, make a little bit more connection with them. I know earlier in our career, we had an easier time just talking to assistants in general about, hey, what exactly is going on here? But the one thing that I do really appreciate with both Scotty Brooks and Nate McMillan, neither of whom have, at the very least, reputations as great modern technicians, particularly Nate McMillan, who a lot of people see as very outdated, both in his approach on the court and his approach with dealing with players, is both of them just have a lot of experience in implementing blank. And I get a very strong sense, time will tell, the decisions of what to implement are largely going to be JJ Redick's vision.
Well, there's no question. Absolutely.
Right. I don't get a sense that the two highest guys on the totem pole, Brooks and McMillan, are really there to help Redick create what's going to be on the court. I get a stronger sense they are there to help him implement it, and also to help him recognize the things you're going to need to do in order to make sure there is clarity and you are building with purpose.
Sounding boards, really good. And it was interesting. One of the things that Redick talked about Monday at practice was limiting the amount. This is another thing that I think, you talk about establishing credibility. We got into the schedule, got into using time wisely, being precise, doing things with purpose and being efficient, and that's really one of the offensive efficiency, defensive efficiency, practice efficiency. Efficiency is like the name of the game for the Lakers this year. It's a big theme. The other thing that Redick said was that he is allowing Bob Byer, Greg St. Jean, these assistants,
Lindsey Harding, everyone down the line,
talk a lot. That he is consciously trying to limit the amount of that his voice is heard. And on the one hand, you could say, well, he's gonna look like he's not in charge. Where I don't think that's what that means. I think what this does, assuming again everything runs smoothly, is he doesn't look like he needs to be micromanaging everything in order to get the respect of the players, in order to have the respect of his staff. He feels in control and comfortable enough and confident enough in what he's doing to allow assistant coaches to do their jobs. And all of these things are not a given. It is not a given that a coach is going to run practices efficiently when they don't know what they're doing, or quite yet, or don't have the experience. Don't know what they're doing is the wrong way to put it. Don't have the experience.
No, they may not know what they're doing.
They may not, but I mean, I don't want people to say like Redick doesn't know what he's doing. I think he very well may, but he doesn't have experience in doing what he's doing.
No, I just mean you don't know what you don't know until you actually do it. That's all.
Right. And so, I was really struck by this idea of, I'm going to, who else does a great job of that?
Sean McVay.
Exactly. And, even when, and not now, I mean, right now, Sean McVay is a made guy. I realize the Rams are struggling, but I mean, that ain't his fault. McVay is a made guy. And one of the things he's always had a reputation for is empowering his assistants to not just do their jobs, but like really do their jobs well and thrive. And if for Redick to be able to do that, now Sean McVay had way more experience as an assistant, but the principle is the same. And so like, these are the little things in management that I'm fascinated by. And I hope over time to learn a little bit more about how Redick looks at these questions of time management and editing and prioritizing and, what he does behind the scenes with his coaches versus what the players see and all this other stuff. Because if you want to figure out, like, can the guy fast track improvement to the point of really helping the team, this is the sort of thing that's, that is going to be really critical for that.
In the meantime, too, he also said that he's planning on running a 9-man rotation, as you mentioned earlier, Brian, for the time being with Jared Vanderbilt hurt. That seems to be the 5 named starters, Max Christie, Gabe Vincent, Jackson Hayes, and then presumably Dalton Connect. Things I think will become interesting once Vando's available and once Christian Wood is available. And maybe they become even a little bit more interesting if
Cam Reddish, by the way, I think missed Monday's practice.
He missed some of it. He missed some of it. It was not specified, at least in great detail. It'll be interesting once, I guess, all hands are available. And JJ mentioned that in laying out who he saw as possibilities for the rotation, he essentially named everybody but like Bronny, Maxwell Lewis, and the two-way guys. So it'll be interesting to see how that stuff lays out. Also, too, sometimes
Maxwell Lewis and the two-way guys sounds like a great soul band.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. I am more confident in Maxwell Lewis and the two-way guys on stage than on the court. But that's a different story. I
would totally go see them at the Palladium.
Yeah, much more than I would go see them at the Crypt. Sometimes, though, 9-man rotations, sometimes coaches have a little bit of leeway for 9.5, where like one guy plays 7 or 8 minutes, and in the coach's mind, that guy's not really part of the rotation. Mm-hmm. So
and foul trouble is going to change things.
Sure. We'll see where it goes.
It was definitely interesting to hear him talk about, like, at a time when, we're monitoring LeBron, we're monitoring Anthony Davis, and so on and so on and so on. But we're not going to extend the amount of players necessarily. We're not automatically. I mean, Darvin and other coaches do this. It's not, but like Darvin would routinely play more guys. I mean, I think especially early last year, a lot of guys were on the floor.
Vogel played a lot of guys. Like you mentioned, a lot of coaches do.
And there's a problem. There are downsides to driving the same 8 or 9 guys really hard over the course of a regular season and then expecting them to have energy in the playoffs. But, it will put a premium too on a player like Christie, and we'll get to him next. Really playing well. Like, because if you want to both limit LeBron, limit AD, and all these other things, the supporting players need to play well enough that you can shave a few minutes off of the burden that those guys carry. You can win enough games that they can sit, maybe the last 3 or 4 minutes of a fourth quarter or something like that. That's really where I know you've made a point of this, Andy. It's the ability to sit guys down more than figuring out what they do on the court. That, like, have LeBron take fewer shots or, dribble less or something. Like, just figure out ways to play him less. Best way to do that, win big when you can, beat Detroit by 18 when you play like the one game against a bad team in the first 10, stuff like that.
Yeah. And Max Christie could potentially play a role in that, as could D'Angelo Russell, who we haven't gotten to his media day time on the dais. He was really interesting. So that's coming up next. Locked On Lakers is brought to you by GameTime, the best concert I've ever seen in my life. George Clinton and the Parliament Funkadelic, 1992, Hollywood Palladium. They played for 5 hours without a break, and I have been ever since chasing a concert that could top that. I've seen a few that came close. Prince at the Forum, Neil Young at the Greek, John Lee Hooker at the House of Blues. As I keep the search going, I'm going to be using GameTime because they make finding tickets easy with the new feature like GameTime Picks. Filters out all the confusing, flowery verbiage and shows you only incredible deals on great seats. They save you time. It's like JJ Redick designed the whole thing. They offer seat views with panoramic views before you buy, so you know exactly what the view to the stage will be like. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off.
So it's funny, like there are two kind of big things left on the docket for today, both of which I know we both find very compelling, and probably only one of which we'll get to today. One is Max Christie, who was a big topic of conversation both on Monday at Media Day, talked up by a lot of other players. He was a big topic of conversation last week when Rob Pelinka and Redick met with the media. The Lakers are clearly making a concerted effort to kind of pump up Christie, and he was called out by name today by JJ Redick and LeBron, I think, for that matter too.
Yep.
The other one is D'Angelo Russell, who probably had the most interesting, aside maybe from LeBron, had the most interesting media day interview of anyone. And everybody who watches this show, the everydayers, certainly know that we find D'Angelo Russell to be a very interesting fellow, which is maybe part of the reason we both have kind of a soft spot for the guys. We just appreciate dudes who speak with candor. So Andy, I will leave, because you're older than I am, I will leave it to you to choose where you want to start for this last segment, where you want to get into Christie or you want to get into the D'Lo stuff.
Let's get into Christie and save D'Lo for Wednesday, or excuse me, for Thursday, because that could be a larger conversation. We can maybe use a little bit more time with it, but I definitely want to get into it on Thursday because, as always, D'Angelo Russell is a big talking point for the season. With Christie, though, beyond just how much, we've been hearing since the offseason, which for Max Christie officially began with getting a contract before he even hit restricted free agency. Yep. Like that figured it out before he even went to market. But ever since then, once you started hearing JJ Redick talk up how much he liked Max Christie, like every time he ever talked about the young core or like players that he was excited about. Max Christie's name kept coming up. Rob Pelinka revealed during his press conference with JJ last week that one of the reasons that they locked up Christie so quickly was Redick kept talking about what he wanted to do with Max Christie and how much utility he thought he could bring to this team. And, it's not at the same level, I think, exactly with, I've talked many times about how Jared Vanderbilt is in a lot of ways the most singular player on this team, or at the very least, most singular role player, because the things that he does, rebounding, that type of defensive versatility, the perimeter defense, that energy, that physicality, there's really nobody else among role players who does it all in one player. Max Christie in his own right, he might be on that level too, because when you think about his strengths at the very least in the backcourt, catch and shoot 3-point shooting. He, his 3-point shooting overall is good, not incredible, but catch and shoot, he's been very, very good. He's the best rebounder on this team, positions 1 through 3, and I don't think it's particularly even close.
Well, go ahead, finish. But I mean,
and his ability to defend on the ball, and his athleticism, the speed.
In theory, for all of these things, I don't. Here's where maybe this is where I think I am not quite there on Christie relative to some other people. Is I think he has shown the capacity for these things. I think he has shown the skill set where these things could be true. I do not think he has shown consistently that he is those things. So I think a lot of what the success for this team is predicated on, the success of this rotation, is being correct about that. And I think Christie understands that. There is a statistical gap between what we've seen. There's a lot of noise in some of these numbers just because of who he's played with and inconsistency. And he was like 9 years old when he first played in the NBA and all these other things. But the one, when we talked about Hollinger's evaluation of that contract, for example, his big criticism was the Lakers are paying for production that has not been borne out by any kind of statistics. And while that can be overrated sometimes, it's also, in this case, I think, true. And so all of those things are in theory true. And I agree with you that if they are true, Christie fills a role that nobody else on the team really fills in the same way. But I don't think that we have seen definitively that those things are true yet.
If you want to say that the sample size isn't large enough to say it's definitive, that's fair, because Max Christie's sample size as a player just isn't that big, particularly given how in and out of the rotation he's been in his 2 years in the NBA. Where I do think the numbers, though, and some of what we've seen in some observations are more than just theoretical, beyond just the eye test and things that you've literally seen him do, is the numbers when he's playing like with LeBron or with Anthony Davis or with D'Angelo Russell or like the best guys on the team. The advanced numbers are typically pretty good. And I know people will say, well, he's with the best guys. But the flip side is, people talked about Alex Caruso, the best plus minus with LeBron like his entire career. That's why you need to keep the guy, which I'm not arguing isn't true. But I'm just saying if it's going to apply to one guy, that theory has to apply to everybody. The other thing too is
right, I'm saying like his on-off statistics, his things like that are not always favorable. Whereas in the case of Reeves in his rookie year, of Caruso, in my reading at least, the numbers for those guys were better. They were clear. Those kinds of relationships and correlations, I think, were clearer.
Maybe, but I think those guys also got more opportunity, and they got more consistent opportunity. So
it's not entirely, but I'm just
No, I know, but I'm just saying that would be my counter to that. Is those guys got more consistent opportunity. I also, something that struck me a lot last year, Stu Lance, beyond being, I think, just a phenomenal commentator, I think we can all agree the man has seen a lot of basketball. He knows of which he speaks. And if you paid attention to games, Stu Lance is, he's a Laker through and through. He's a company man. He's never going to, as much as he comes from and I really appreciate this, he comes from the Chick Hearn school of not BSing your fans and not BSing your viewers and not pretending something is better than it is. He's not going to obviously just go scorched earth on the team ever, unless they just truly play awful and deserve it, because it's just not what you do.
Right.
But every time Max Christie would be on the court, you would notice Stu Lance in so many words saying that, when that young man's out there, good things tend to happen. And without questioning why he wasn't on the court more directly, he certainly did a lot of indirect questioning of why he wasn't on the court.
Yeah, none of this that I'm pointing out is to say that I think it was stupid for the Lakers to sign Christie, that I think it was a mistake to give him this rotation spot.
No, you've never criticized him.
Right, or that I think it's that I don't think he's going to play well. I think the answer to all three of those things is yes, they should have signed him. Yes, he needs to be in the rotation, and yes, I think he'll play well and do what they need him to do, and has a chance to even exceed that. And I think the one thing that I think is definitely true of Christie, that maybe, take like a guy like Maxwell Lewis, for example, not to pick on the kid, but Christie is the kind of guy who can go in and play with good players. Not all young players can. Caruso is like that. Reeves is like that. Christie is like that. They're smart, high IQs. They stay in their lane, and they know they know the assignment, and they can go fill it. So I think I'm very bullish on Christie, but very similar to Rui last year, where the assumption was playoff Rui. That's where playoff Rui never done that in the regular season, and the results turned out to be, once he got a consistency in the rotation, he's got flaws. We knew what they were, but the things that they were relying on him to do, be a pretty reliable offensive force, to be a good 3-point shooter, stuff like that, he came through and was more or less the $17 million player that they needed him to be, or expected him to be in terms of skill set. And so I see a lot of that with Christie for this year.
Okay. I'm glad you brought that up, because before we go, I wanted to actually pay off a YouTube question that we got in the comment section of the YouTube page. And this was from JV Licious. What is the real potential of Christie versus the optimism for THT a few years ago? And we both thought this is a really great question, and said maybe we'd bring this onto the show. And what I said to him, though, is, to me, the biggest difference between Christie and THT is that Christie's best skills, like I mentioned before, defense, outside shooting, rebounding, are easier to put in a clearly defined role, whereas THT was much more of an on-ball player and really not very useful away from it. So you had to tailor things around THT more to just theoretically unlock him. And even though neither at this stage of their respective careers were truly proven, I think Christie's potential, which, for what it's worth, I've been very high on him since his rookie season, I think his potential feels more concrete, whereas THT's potential felt more like something, the ingredients were there, but it's not even mixed, much less baked. And THT requires more imagination in a lot of ways than Christie. And look, I say this as somebody who saw a lot of potential in THT. I saw something in him at the very least. And I think the Lakers, in all honesty,
sort of that multitude of skills that he seemed to have, where his arms were 8,000 feet long and all this other stuff, that you sort of felt like you could find almost like one of these young unicorn players, and you sort of project. I do agree with you.
And the Lakers screwed it up the minute they brought in Russ, because Russ was going to be getting a lot of minutes that theoretically you'd be giving to THT to do the same thing as a poor man's Russ. But THT hasn't really developed in Utah either.
Right. It didn't work out. And then, there is a danger of that with Christie. There's no question. Sure. We'll get to D'Lo tomorrow, and some other things that pop out of practice over the course of the week. Get you ready for Friday's game. Locked on Lakers on YouTube is where over 25,000 subscribers go to leave questions and comments like the one Andy just paid off. We will see everyone tomorrow.